If you have a small butt or a lack of glute development, and no matter what you try, you can't seem to get them to activate properly during exercises or throughout your life, I'm gonna show you the surprising reason why that is and what you can do to fix it. The problem is actually surprisingly that people can't get enough length or opening of their glutes in order to properly contract them. Now, I know that might sound weird, but bear with me for a second. In order for a muscle to properly contract, it needs to come from a position of relative elongation or length. Now, the glutes attach on the back of the pelvis and also the femur or the thigh bone right here. They wrap around the pelvis like this. Now, when the backside of the pelvis opens up like this, and this is what we call internal rotation of the pelvis and also internal rotation of the femur like this, we then have leverage for the glutes to actually contract and close that space off. Now, by far the glutes' biggest role and the glutes' biggest function is to extend the hip. So extension of the hip means we're basically standing up or bringing our hips underneath ourselves from a position of hip bend. The glutes also create external rotation, or the femur bone sliding out like this. External rotation of the pelvis involves the back of the pelvis closing off like this from a position of internal rotation. So the key is this: as we descend into more and more hip bend, or what we would call hip flexion, the back of our pelvis opens up and we move into more internal rotation of our femur right here. So that happens more and more and more as we descend deeper into something like a squat or a deadlift. Now, at some point, the glute will be elongated enough in a deeper position of hip flexion to allow us to then stand up and extend the hip, get our leg underneath ourselves, close off the backside of the pelvis like this, and properly contract. But it will only be able to extend our hip, and it will only be able to close off the backside of the pelvis if there is space for it to close off in the first place. The big issue I see is that people don't actually know how to get properly into that hip bent position, that hip flexion position, to create length in the glutes. And so they try to contract their glutes all day long with different exercises or bands around the knees or whatever, but that's actually not helping. A big issue I see is people think that they're gonna get more glute activation when they put a band around their knees and shove their knees out. This is feeding the problem. People already have glutes that can't properly elongate. So if we're putting a band around our knees and shoving our knees out, what is that doing? That's preventing us from accessing that internal rotation because it's forcing us into a bunch of external rotation. So that's not going to allow us to properly utilize our glutes. You might feel like you're getting a burn, but that's because you're just keeping a muscle shortened and squeezed the entire time you're going through a movement. That's not ideal for getting a muscle to stimulate growth. The summary is this: the glutes create hip extension and also external rotation. So we need to properly come from a position of hip internal rotation and flexion. So that's where the backside of the pelvis is open. That's what I see people struggle with. You'll know this is very likely you if you have a limitation in your hip internal rotation range of motion. Ideally, we're looking for around 40 degrees here, but people with this problem will have less than that, usually 25 degrees or less. Now I'm going to show you how you can open up space on both sides or one side if you're struggling with growing your glutes or getting them to activate, and also how you can then carry that over to an actual exercise. Here's a great way to start opening up that space in the back of your hips. Grab a ball or some sort of squishable object about this thick and place it up deep in your groin. And then get far enough away from the wall to where you can have your hands starting around shoulder height, but you're slightly leaning forward. Now, keeping your eyes and your gaze between your hands at all times, slowly start to walk your hands down that wall, stopping at the point where you feel the slightest stretch in the backside of your hips. For me, that's probably right about here. I'm gonna sit here and give that ball just a tiny little squeeze, maybe just like a 3 out of 10. I'm gonna breathe in through my nose, out through my mouth, maintaining this position. I should feel no tension in my low back whatsoever. If I do, I'm either going too deep or I'm not getting in the right position with my pelvis. So you might wanna play around with doing a little bit of an anterior tilt to get more of a stretch, but you can go so far into an anterior tilt that your back starts to hurt. So play around with the tilt of your pelvis. You should feel no tension in your back, and it should only be a glute stretch. If your problem with glute activation is more on one side, what you can do is find something about waist height and a book or some platform that's only about 1 to 2 inches thick underneath the side that you want to open up. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your passive side and you're going to place that midfoot in line with the toes of the side you're going to stretch out, just hip width apart like this. You're going to place your hands totally flat on that thing, and then you're going to lock out your elbows first. Now, you want to feel the foot contacts on this side of your inner heel and the base of the big toe without losing the outside foot, just like on the other exercise. But now you're focused on keeping most of your weight through this foot right here. What you're going to do is you're going to push your hips back and off to that side. For me, I'm stretching out my left side, so I'm pushing them back and off to the left. Now notice how my right knee is ahead of my left knee, but both knees are very slightly bent. Now the key is to keep a neutral spine, and I'm going to go down onto my elbows, but only after I push my hips back and off to the left. I'm gonna make sure that my back and my neck are relaxed, and I feel just a stretch in the back of my glute right here. It's sort of like a bony sensation. It's kind of in like the lower and somewhat outer portion right through here. And I'm just gonna sit here and breathe in through my nose, out through my mouth, melting into this position. And if you aren't feeling as much of a stretch as you think you should, then think about pushing this knee in a little bit and making sure that your hip is going out and back, not just straight back. If you like this explanation and you're starting to feel your glutes work a little bit more, check out my beginner body restoration program. It's designed to address a lot of different muscular imbalances and also your asymmetries from side to side, which this video doesn't get into all that much. But if you want something that will do a great job of addressing that and helping you feel and move better, check out the link down below in the description.